they are starting a little bit late, so we'll just kind of go with the flow if more people join, but we'll get started. So I wanted to start off because, again, this is our interactive networking event that's being hosted by the PEO Oakville chapter. And our intent was to kind of provide a session for students and key participants in terms of how to give and get constructive feedback through practicing essential skills and personal reflection. I did reach out to a few of the registration people as well, just to kind of ask, what do you guys want to get out of this event? So I do have some content that addresses some of those questions that I received. So before we start, let's do kind of roundtable introductions. I'll start with myself. So my name is Brenda, and I am part of the PEO Oakville chapter. I recently started volunteering again, and previously I was involved at a chapter level with PEO for a few years in another chapter before I moved. So I think it should be, I did get my 5-year certificate of volunteering a few years ago. I won't date myself, but again, just the background, I did want to spend some time just explaining the roles that the chapter play in terms of how we connect to PEO. So essentially, the chapters are there to kind of bridge the communication between our members who are PNGs. So if you're a student, I'm going to highly encourage you to go into the website. I started off my journey as an engineer in training while I was in university. I've participated in the NEM events, and back then we would have all these amazing conferences. So this is also a learning for everyone with the whole virtual world. So I'm hoping, let's keep it interactive. Let's talk about key things that you guys want to get out of this session. And then I want to make sure you guys are walking away with the value. By profession, I'm a chemical engineer. I started off my career in the auto. Yes, Pat, I love chemies, right? We're the best. So I started off my career in the auto industry via co-op. Co-op program through my university. I went to Lakehead University. And part of that journey, I ended up transitioning to the food industry, which I absolutely love. So I've worked with Kraft, Nabisco. So pretty much I tell my children I can make pretty much most of the stuff that's in a grocery store is my goal. I've done beverage, cookies and snacks and chocolate. And I've done meat as well. And then now I'm working for Weston Foods, and we're pretty much the North American bakery there. So I enjoy the elements of just, utilizing my skills. So this session, as I was preparing, allowed me to do a lot of reflection. So hopefully I can be able to share some insights with you guys. So that's a little bit about me, and maybe Norbert, who's our chapter chair for the PEO Oakville, I'll put you on spot to do a quick intro for us, please.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. Hope you can hear me okay. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. So as Brenda said, my name is Norbert Lee. I'm the chapter chair with PEO Oakville. So we are volunteers. And so after working, sitting on the sideline, just looking in from the outside, I decided to volunteer with the chapter, I think 8-9 years ago, and I've been involved ever since. It's great fun and lots of learning and networking opportunity, something I would highly encourage as engineers as we progress our profession. Always stay in touch with just network. I guarantee you'll learn tons of stuff. From an education perspective, I was a electrical grad from McMaster, and from there I always wanted to be a designer. I did that for a couple of years. Then I said, no, I like to go outside the four walls, not just the desk. I started getting to application, technical stuff, and then I evolved into technical sales. During a time when the technology was evolving from mainframes, mini computers, to distributed computing, which is networking. So I joined a small company called Cisco Systems. Just kidding. I was there for many years. Then my latest employer is IBM Canada, and having lots of fun. I always recommend people just to move on and do different things, because this is a journey. It's like Brenda kind of said, when she reflects back, she sees a lot of great progression. I can say the same for myself. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Norbert. Sam, you want to go next? I'm looking at how my screen's set up. So.
I'll be short and sweet.
Nice.
My name is Samer Nchasi. I go with Sam. I'm a new, hopefully, I'm admitted as a volunteer with the Oakville chapter. Just like Norbert, I'm also kind of been on the sidelines, especially with Oakville chapter. And I've looked on from outside and different volunteer opportunities that I've done. I urge everyone to volunteer. I think it's very important. I think it gives you a little bit of satisfaction beyond just the career goals. It's the returning to the profession and making sure that you do have good contacts. So I do volunteer on Engineers Canada at this point, and I'm members at large there with the Municipal Engineering Association, etc. In terms of my career, it's just like Norbert. I started off, I wanted to be a designer, and I finished civil engineering. Wanted to go into transportation design, but my first job was structural designer at Morrison Hershfield. I've since moved to MMM at that point, Marshall Macklin Monahan. I think now it's called WSP, or at least it's a part of WSP. I moved as an airport engineering and training. That was really exciting for me because I had a chance to travel and go into airports and work on a lot of interesting things. Since that point, I moved to highway design and construction, and then to the municipal world. At this point, I work for the town of Oakville. I'm a senior manager actually in works operations. And again, what's interesting about civil engineering and engineering in general is you can really make what you want out of your career. And it does change, and you can be agile. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm really looking forward to working and meeting and answer any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Andrew, quick introduction, if you can tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew. I currently am a Waterloo student. I'm going into my 4th year starting in May, but I've had quite a few co-ops and I'm in mechanical engineering, so I've worked in a little bit in oil in Mississauga, and then in pet food currently in automotive. So I'm just kind of having that panic of like, I have to be a real person here. So I'm trying to figure out where it is I want to go.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad to hear that. I think I have a few insights. So again, I want to make sure you leave with the value, right? So any specific questions, like this time is for you guys. Awesome. Pat.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually know Andrew. We were involved in the same engineering society things when I was at Waterloo. So hi, my name is Pat Duong. I am a somewhat recent grad from the University of Waterloo in chemical engineering. I have a background in mostly the food industry, both public and private sector, as well as science communication and education. So I was involved with CEEA, if anybody's familiar with that, Canadian Engineering Education Association. And currently I am looking for work. I was in the food industry, but it just got laid off recently due to COVID. And so I am looking and aware. So when Brenda said food, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to talk to her.
Chat. Yes.
Yes. And so other than that, right now, I am involved with Society of Women Engineers in Toronto as well. So, and doing some mentorship for first year students, because I guess I've learned things since first year. And so it's nice to be able to like learn, earn, and now return.
Yeah. Well, perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Bruce.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bruce Lee. I'm a electrical engineer by education. I worked as design engineer and project engineer for about 10, 15 years, and slowly moved towards project management. And now I worked as senior project manager at the City of Toronto. My experience I have experience in light manufacturing, food and beverage, and some part of energy. But large part of my experience is with municipalities focus on the water and wastewater treatment. So that's about me. I worked.
Perfect.
on the consultant side, I worked for a few consulting companies. One of them is in Oakville, actually. It's the EMA. And worked for Delk and Parsons in Markham before. And I worked for a system integrator in North Topco for a shorter period of time. It's interesting. They have like business in automotive, food, and that's when I get to see different industry other than water and wastewater. Yeah, that's I joined the Oakville chapter or get involved more actively this year, and really exciting. And I found a great value of join the chapter and volunteer with the chapter. I see all these great people, and it's really good opportunity for me to learn and network with people. Good to see everybody here.
Fantastic. Enoch?
Hi, my name is Enoch Tsay, and I'm not from the Oakville chapter. I'm from the York chapter, actually. And I basically started. I did my undergrad at U of T in mechanical engineering. I've always knew that I wanted to get into engineering, especially in math and science. It's something that I've always liked. And I started in the private sector. I was a project engineer in Magna for a number of years. I think pretty much everyone here knows Magna. And then I was a program manager at Klipsch, and that's how I got experience in sound. And after the recession hit, I got into the government. So now I'm working for the Ministry of the Environment as a senior noise engineer. So I specialize in noise pollution. And then when I was in government, I realized that, oh, I really enjoy being in the public sector. So I decided to do a master in public administration. And then I fell in love with policy. And so I also did a PhD in public policy as well. So yeah, so basically that's my background.
Fantastic. And then last on the screen, Jorgen.
Pardon me? Oh.
Sorry. Go ahead. My name is Jürgen. I'm currently self-employed I'm a mechanical engineer in the building systems space. And what I'm doing now is assisting clients with wellness in the built environment, especially with what's going on nowadays. It seems to be very important. And that's where I'm going. What my background is, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from many years ago. I was in the telecommunications space for about 15, 20 years. And then I decided to change careers after some consolidation around, just after the Y2K stuff happened and a lot of companies consolidated in Canada in terms of telecommunications. Then I went to personal finance for a couple of years, which was a hobby of mine. After that, after 2008, and the market crashed, I changed careers again and went back to school and got a mechanical engineering technology diploma in building sciences. Then I worked in the public sector for a number of years, utilizing those skills, but more on the life cycle analysis portion of it. So looking at buildings, when things will start to fail, how much it will cost to repair them or to replace them, and doing that sort of thing. And then now I'm on my own and focusing more on wellness in the built environment.
Fantastic. So I want to share my screen and we'll kind of jump into some of the content that we had prepared for our session. So if you guys can, if you can see my screen, okay?
Hey, Brenda, I think there's someone.
What about Sarah?
Oh, Sarah, actually, my apologies. I think I'd mentioned this at the beginning. So Sarah is our coordinator with NEM. So she was helping me with the admin in terms of just setting up the meeting at the beginning. And then she's staying on because they are doing their recording in the background. And then just for any technical difficulties, she's on standby. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
we did kind of, as we were thinking of how we're going to put the agenda together, and then some of the feedback that I got from everyone was we've kind of finished our part one, which was just our introductions, getting to know each other, because I want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. So the second piece that we'll jump into is really, I know, Andrew, I think you had also responded and a few other people had actually asked in terms of if I am about to go into my 4th year or whether it's for a PhD as an example, how do I pick and manage those capstone projects or building timelines, et cetera? So the second section is really about, you know, what is the thought process that you may need to put together as a student in terms of just picking and managing that. And then the last part of our session, again, is really going to be about, you know, getting into that. How do I give and get constructive feedback through practicing essential skills? So I did a little bit of research, and as I mentioned, this actually became a reflection exercise for me throughout my career as well. So I'm hoping that we can all share. I do have a little snippet of a TED Talk that just to trigger some thought processes as we proceed. So I'll move on to our part 2 of the section. So just for background, again, I've been out of school for a while. I won't age myself, but in terms of, you know, what is the intent of the engineering capstone projects that we see across our universities from a standardization perspective? So it's really there to enable students to synthesize the knowledge that they've gained in their discipline by allowing them to apply what they learned. So back in the day, before some of the accreditation work that PEO and some of these bodies across the provinces were worked in, students actually had to go find their own real world experiences, whether it was getting internships on their own that were not supported by the university or do some part-time work just so they can get that experience. With the standardization and accreditation program, this is now part of, you know, the education stream. So Andrew, as you're going into your 4th year, I hope some of the things we'll cover today will really allow you to think about, when I get to do that capstone project, what are the key things, and to ensure that you get the value that's you deserve as part of that experience as well. So I did reach out to a few of my friends and reflected again in terms of who are professors currently in industry supporting some of these type of projects. So there's really 3 ways that professors look to assign the capstone projects. So the first one is, you know, students can select their own capstone project, and the main pro with this is it allows the student to really focus, right, on a project that aligns to their skills and long-term interests. So, and then additionally, your professor can be your sponsor. The cons to this type of, you know, picking your own project is it's a little bit easy to game the system too, right? If you're going to pick something that you do really well, you know, you can finish, you know, scope out something, finish it off within a month. And then it's really, are you challenging yourself really towards the capabilities of the items that you learned? So I think part of these projects as well is really about making sure that you're learning, you're challenging yourself to actually get more experiences and get out of your comfort zone, because essentially when you finish university and you go out into industry, right, it's a big jump, and the capstone project is really there to start evoking some of those differences that you will see as you progress in your careers. Another option that is currently used is to simulate capstone projects. I actually did a simulation which was tied to remedial. I know someone mentioned that they did a couple of co-ops in the oil industry. So my 4th year thesis assignment that I did a few years back was actually to validate a testing method in terms of the remediation of soil after like an oil spill, as an example. So someone had developed a process, and it was more about continuing to support them to get the data. So I did a lot of experiments in the lab in terms of validating that their method indeed worked, right? So that for me was, I did have industry people sponsoring my university for me to be able to validate this method on their behalf. But again, it was something that was simulated where it was all essentially lab work, right? So here are a lot of issues because I needed to get actual real life samples in the industry. So shipping things from Fort McMurray or like various areas across the world was a little bit challenging, which also took away from some of the time that I had in order to do all my testing and validation. So those are things to consider in terms of the type of projects that you want to be executing as part of your project, because you do have that time constraint of, you know, the duration of that course. And then the third way that capstone projects can also be executed, and this is the most valuable approach, is really get get an organization and help them solve real problems. So again, here, the cons that, some universities may shy away from this is that professors and students need to constantly network and find those type of projects. So I actually have worked with a few students from U of T when I used to be with Kraft Foods, because part of our co-op program when they were in the second and third year was to actually come and work during the summer at the bakeries. And we would give them kind of productivity projects in terms of, when we make our Chips Ahoy chocolate chip cookies, how do we ensure that, the chocolate chips are not falling out of the cookie when it goes into the oven? So a lot of those efficiency type of projects are what my students would work on. And some of them did reach out to me after the fact and said, hey, I'm going into my fourth year. I have a capstone project that I have to do. Could I finish my co-op project that I was working on as part of my capstone project? So you need an organization that will also support it. We were able to actually sign non-disclosure agreements, as an example, with their university, and it ended up working really well because the university got great projects which are industry related for these students, and then in turn we actually got great students that would either become co-op students with us or actually progress to become engineers within our bakeries as well, or at a corporate level in engineering. So I think, Andrew, I know you're going into your fourth year, like use some of the experience that you see on this call to reach out in terms of, what are the opportunities or the type of projects or even other people that you have within your network as well. So now I did get a few questions as well in terms of how do I manage a project? What are the various steps? So I'm not going to do PMP 101. It's really, again, let's touch base on what are those key elements that you need to think about as you're executing your capstone projects. And again, if there's specific questions, guys, feel free to unmute and ask any questions that you may have or any adds that the team may feel are relevant. So the first step is essentially kind of 4 key areas when you're executing a project, right? It's you're initiating the project, you have to plan for it, then you execute against your plan, and then always important is that, you close off what your project is. So we'll start off with a few tips in terms of initiating a project. Essentially, you want to perform a feasibility study, right? So you do have a duration, which is however long your term is to turn around to that capstone project. So you want to make sure that you're working on something that's feasible. What are you solving for? And are you going to be able to complete that in time for you to do your presentations for that capstone project? So in able to do this, it's always, you should always do your project charter, which is identifying what is the scope, what is the solve that I'm trying to do, or what is the scope of work that I have to do. In terms of the objectives, you want to list, what are the key deliverables or outcomes that I want to establish. In my example of my thesis project, I was validating a method that had been developed by someone else. I was going to receive samples from various oil sites and remediate the soil using this method. And in terms of my objectives, I wanted to understand the repeatability of this testing method that had been developed. In terms of your participants as well, it's really important for you to list where do you need the support, who do you need the support from. So for me, it was identifying that I'm going to need someone to give me the actual soil samples that have had, their oil contamination, right? So it was about my professor helped me identify from his own stakeholders and people in industry that he knew that were able to send me samples. We also needed that investment in the chemicals and equipment that was detailed as part of this testing method. So the university supported me in terms of purchasing some of those items. So you really want to detail, and where you don't know, you will, again, it's something new that you haven't done, right? I didn't know that this project existed, but my professor talked about it. I got interested in it. And it's always important to ask questions where you don't even have clarity, because at the end of the day, you have to do the work. So make sure that you're very clear on what it is that you have to be performing. You also want to identify your key stakeholders. So in terms of your sponsor, as I mentioned, it could be a professor, they're there to support you. Or if you're doing an industry related project, right, it's that person within industry that you're going to be reporting to. Or in my case, my students would actually, they had deliverables that I had to deliver to my own leadership at the bakery in terms of the cost savings that we were going to be making. And then it's important to select their project management tools, and it's outside of the execution, but again, as I mentioned, right, it's, in my case, it was the chemicals that needed to be bought, we needed special testing equipment, so it's really detailing what are those tools that I'm going to need, and then as well as how am I going to track it, am I going to build my plan in Excel, or you just want to make sure you're doing that inventory of everything you will need to be able to deliver the project. And then the last piece is always alignment. A lot of people don't think about it, is everyone can agree, but it's always important to make sure that you have everyone, whether it's your professor or your industry experts that you're reaching out to, you always want to get alignment, because this is how you're going to gather the support and the collaboration in terms of once you get into your execution phase. Any questions on this, or we can keep going? Okay. And then in the planning phase of a project, which is the second piece, you want to create your project plan. So this is now the detailed plan of, in the month of January, these are the tasks that I'm going to do. Do I need support from those people? That's the resourcing plan. You would actually put some names of additional people that you may need. You also, at this point, are really defining your goals and performance measures, and you want them to be SMART. I love this acronym. I say it all the time. It didn't make sense to me early in my career, but I really find a lot of value in terms of whatever I'm defining from a performance perspective. It has to be specific. You have to be able to measure it, which is, what is the task that you're doing? Is it measurable, as in, when it starts and you'll know when it finishes? Is it achievable, right? We talked about that feasibility. You don't want to work on or make a goal of something that you're going to have to climb so many hurdles to overcome, right? And then, is it relevant? What is the impact that's going to come out of that specific task? Because a lot of the times you may plan certain tasks against your project that you may not necessarily need to do, and they just add more time in the list that you have to do. And then you'll want to make everything time-based. There has to be a due date and your start date, and then your due date as well, to make yourself accountable and then to be able to track against this plan. So this really leads into, this is how you'll be able to communicate roles and responsibilities to the team members. So if you need additional support, as you detail those tasks, you're putting the names against those tasks, you're building out those timelines with the clear due dates. The next piece is really anticipating risks. I am such an optimistic person. I tend not to gravitate that things will go wrong, but my experience has shown me otherwise. So risk planning is actually one of my favorite things, because, and I remember when I was at Honda of Canada, whether we were putting a wall or building a break room, we would actually get a few people together, a few engineers, to sit down in a room for 30 minutes or so and just plan out of what could go wrong. Could someone open the door the wrong way, right? And hit someone coming in behind. So it's really thinking out loud, anticipating what could go wrong, and then creating the contingency plan. And this is so important as engineers, because at the end of the day, we all take the oath that we're here to, whatever we design, whatever we work on as engineers, we're there to support the safety of the public, right? So how do we do that? It's through this risk analysis, right? We always have to make sure the designs that we make. And I remember when I had my kids as well, it's simple stuff like car seats, right? You don't think of the engineering and the planning that goes against it, but someone literally went through that risk analysis to be able, if a car gets hit, right, the design of that car seat is essentially there to protect this child. So it's really, really important when it comes to creating your risk and creating those contingency plans. And then, as always, you want to get alignment on that plan. So especially if you're adding other people to your project, you want to make sure that they can turn around whatever task you gave them at your due date that you desire it by. So alignment is such a key component when it comes to project management as well. The third phase is executing. This is really where all the meat happens, where you're really getting busy in terms of your time management, your cost management, quality, change management. We talked about the risk, procurement if you need to be purchasing anything to support your project. And then you also want to think about your stakeholders, right? Because essentially, if you're working on a project that a company is sponsoring, you want them to accept your recommendation at the end of the day. Or if it's essentially your professor or your engineering dean is the sponsor there, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're showing that value of the work that you just performed. So the key things that you want to make sure that when you're in the execution phase, at the end of the day, you want to be able to produce your project deliverables. So in that plan, you kind of listed all the tasks with the due dates that you wanted to do. So you want to make sure those deliverables are completed, they're tested, they're accepted, and then essentially they're going to get approved. Change management is also a big aspect because this is really how you kind of bring everything together. So again, in the example of my co-op students in the bakery, they actually found significant efficiencies on the production line, and we needed to change the job structure of their production line workers and then change some of the standard operating procedures for even some of our maintenance teams. So that change takes a long time to embed. It has to be thoughtful. You have to communicate very well. So it was essentially, they spent a lot of time with all the people that would be impacted to make sure that they understood the change and they even saw the benefit to the change as well. So if you're going to be implementing something, buy-in is so important because you'll never be able to bring in change unless you get the people around you to see it and to support it. So change management is really something important as well as you're executing your projects. The other piece again is from an accountability perspective, especially since, if you're in your capstone project, your professor is also going to be looking at your measurement of project activities, right? So where you produced a plan, and at the end of the day, it's either how are you pacing with your plan or how are you progressing. And then this really goes into the performance baselines as well, whether sometimes things go wrong, it's how did you course correct to bring you back close to what your original plan was. And this is also another perspective which is important because without a plan you're never going to know if you get scope creep, right? So other people may come back, and I remember the students would always come back and say to me, well, that operator wants something different, right? So again, when you're working on change and people start to see the value, they may bring additional suggestions or give you feedback in terms of why don't you do this, right? So having that plan that we talked about upfront in terms of making it smart, specific, measurable, is it achievable, is really your go back to. So you as the project lead have the autonomy or the authority really to look at the suggestion, look at your plan and ask yourself, is this achievable? Can I add what they're suggesting in? And then if not, you could take it as a recommendation for version 2.0, right? So the intent of managing scope creep is going to be you evaluating, is this valuable? Can I execute it or implement it within the time frame that I have to be able to deliver my capstone project back? So a lot, even with the professor as well, and we'll go in more in detail as we talk about how to get feedback and receive feedback, hopefully, and make it interactive. But this is really where scope creep can be managed by just having some of those dialogues and going back to your plan to assess what was I solving for and does this help or not? And then again, it's the keeping of the project on track by identifying what needs to be done. Okay, and then the last piece, which is closing projects. A lot of companies that I've worked for, we don't do a good job at closing projects. But again, for me, it's so valuable because if you don't close a project, you're never going to improve. You're never going to know what went wrong, what went well, or how when you start a new project later on, how you can actually make it better and then utilize those learnings for better productivity. So project closing for me is equally important as that planning phase. And what I wanted to put here is that, as a student, closing the project for you guys would be you've completed your work and now you have to do the presentation, right? So you may have spent, for me, I spent probably 3 months in the lab, long hours. It got tedious in a while, but I really enjoyed the value I was getting from my technical work. And my difficulty was really, how do I translate that technical work into a presentation format, right? When you're conducting your presentations, you have to be so aware of your audience. So for me, as an example, I was doing this oil remediation validation of this method that had been developed, but the people I was doing the presentation to, one are my peers, across different disciplines. So some were in mechanical, some were in electrical, and then same thing at a professor level as well. So some of them may not care about oil remediation, but it's really about how do you deliver it to your wide audience so they have a very high level understanding of what it is that you were solving for, what it is that you were doing. So this curve here for me, I still even use it in my workplace today, where it's, if I'm ever doing a presentation, how do I kind of build out my slides? Keep it short and concise, right? So at the beginning of your slide, you really want to detail high level as best as you can. What is it that I was doing? What was the current situation, or what were we tasked with? So for me, it was, I have to validate this oil remediation and kind of give them industry of how it would bring value in terms of, if we had an oil spill, this is now an accelerated method that we can test to see if the soil is actually recovering back to its natural state. Your next couple of slides, you really want to introduce your solutions and what they will achieve. So in this case, it was, again, just giving that background of, if we can validate the repeatability of this method, one is a cheaper method. They can be kits that can be made that, various people, whether oil has leaked in private property, as an example, this is a method that they can use to measure the recovery of their soil. You also want to explain the rationale of your solutions and why you believe they'll solve the client's problem, or whether it's, going back to my bakery method, right? The team had to really detail, this is why we're asking you guys as an organization to change the way perhaps your production line was set up, which involves money, because the benefit that you're going to get, you're going to save $100,000 a year if you make that change. By the time you get to the peak of your presentation, you have everyone's attention. They know what it is you were solving for, what it is that you did to solve for it. You've explained how it will help. And then now you really want to get to that climax piece where it's really about bringing your recommendation. So now that you've done all this work and you've shown it, it's amazing, you did a great job. What is your recommendation? So in the bakery example, the team was presenting that, hey, if you guys are able to actually execute and make these changes in a month, within that year, this is the dollar value that the bakery gets to save. And then you want to end it with the implementation plan. So they actually gave me a timeline, which was, if you're okay with the changes, we can order the parts that are needed. They can arrive in 2 weeks, which is the lead time. And then we can start doing the training with their factory workers to implement and start getting those savings. So it's really just, you want to be able to don't add too many details in terms of, I gravitated with my oil remediation project in terms of really going into the nitty gritty of, I want to show everyone how many hours I was in the lab and all the wonderful work that I was doing. But you always have to focus back on who is my audience and what is it that they just need to take away from the presentation that I'm doing. So I'll stop sharing so we can kind of, if there's any questions, any thoughts. And I see there's a few comments that are in the chat here, actually, in terms of the failure mode and effects and analysis. No questions? Andrew, Pat?
I also had a similar approach, I guess. When I was doing my FYDP, I also like my group, we basically emailed all our past co-op supervisors and said, do you have any projects available? So I think that's a pretty good approach to take, especially since people's co-ops seem to be so varied.
Exactly.
So I don't know how the pandemic is affecting that, because I know even with co-ops, like the employment rate right now is so much lower than it already was before. So it might be a little bit of a struggle, but if there's projects you can do remotely, like design based, perhaps if you're in Mac, that's my best guess.
Exactly. And you bring up a good, interesting point as well, because I think just even the learning from a lot of the events that NEM has put forward for this month, it's the whole virtual world is a big dynamic. But what excites me is, and I can speak for my organization, is they're really doing a great job in terms. So Pat, you mentioned where it's, what are those key elements, whether somebody can actually look at data or be able to participate. We're really trying to evolve even how our R&D teams are working so that they're collaborating. So for example, we're getting people to make their pilot samples like at home, and they get to order all these samples. So it's just about working smarter, right? You don't physically have to go to the office. Everyone's got an oven at home. So can we just give you the materials that you need to be successful? So for me, I'm in the mindset that at the end of the day, everyone has to evolve, right? So it'll be interesting and Andrew, for, like after this, hopefully you can have my email address. I would love to know how, as you get into fourth year, how was some of these universities adapting with some of this? But it's all interesting, it's just an interesting future state, right?
Yeah, we normally have a pre-capstone project in our second half of third year term, and before it was kind of like everyone makes one thing that the professor decides, like a steward platform that would tilt based on linear actuators. And personally, I was a little bit annoyed we didn't get that much opportunity to do our own design. But then with the pandemic, the entire course structure was changed, and we were able to define our own scope. And we did a project, and I had half my team remote and half my team was in my area, and we kind of built a prototype in different parts and handed it off to each other when it was time, which was really interesting. Yeah, I'm having a lot of these struggles because I want to be able to do something that is physical and like a product for my capstone, but I'm not sure where to go and how to make sure I can be able to build that with the restrictions that are in place.
I can just add to that. I know where I was working, we were toying with the idea of doing video tours. So if there's a company that is open, you have to sign NDAs and all that kind of stuff. But if they're open to doing a video call where you can go and see the process without maybe actually being there, that's pretty interesting, with the technology we have access to now.
Yeah.
But you just have to find someone who's open to doing stuff like that.
And it's a good point too, because, and Andrew, I think this is where for me, it's before we get into our feedback piece, right? It's everything has changed so much. So I think you're actually in a state of power almost, right? To be able to just throw those ideas and ask people, because we've had it's like I spoke about at work right now, because we make a lot of the buns for food service. So Popeyes, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, all those burgers, and we also do donuts and tortillas for Tim Hortons. So part of it is people are buying burgers and they're via Uber Eats or something, which normally isn't. You buy a McDonald's burger, you have to kind of eat it before it gets soggy. So the pushback from these customers has been, we need to make buns that still taste the same, but that are a little bit more resilient to allow that Uber Eats driver to deliver it, so that when the person gets their food, it's still integrity, right? So mind blowing. I would have never thought that that's a thing, right? But to your point, it was literally some of those product developers, because we actually shut down our manufacturing plants just for the two outsiders in terms of the R&D people going to run trials on the plants. So it's literally only the employees that need to run those equipments are the only people that go in. So the R&D people having to just utilize the tools that they have at home, get all the ingredients, do their pilots, do their own little studies. So this is where the design of experiments too is a whole new ball game, because I had one R&D person share with me how they went to the store, just stuff in their cupboard, like ketchup, mustard, whatever. They were just doing their own DOEs to be like, did I do the job? Is it soaking or what's going on, right? Or sometimes they even came with the reco of changing how they're layering. So you know how the ketchup and everything goes directly on the bun, and the recommendations like, no, put a layer of that lettuce first, right? So it's all interesting how everyone's figuring out. So maybe you could even put together of how can companies do things different than they have been doing it today, right? So that leads in nicely into, I don't know if there's any other discussion points anyone wanted to add.
Maybe just to add, the one thing is that whenever you're picking your capstone, just make sure you're passionate about that project. I think it's very important that you really, because it is a commitment. You're spending a year, you're kind of making sure you're tying to a supervisor potentially. If you can tie to industry, that will really help you. I still recall, like, if you have something in mind, go and ask. It's okay to ask. I did mine with my thesis with iTrans, for instance, and I had my supervisor, who's the prof at the university, accept that position so that I can make sure I created a model. It was traffic, an accident model, and to come up with an equation that will show what will happen at signalized and unsignalized intersections. So it was really good that I helped the place that I was hoping to work at. And these are important, maybe, elements to consider.
And I think it's also important to, I think I wanted to add to what Sam said too, is that the passion is important because during the capstone project, oftentimes things won't go your way. And sometimes things will go wrong and you can get discouraged easily because, you're not getting the data that you wanted to get. So that the passion will keep you going so that you want to solve the problem so that you can move forward. So yeah, that's absolutely important.
Oh,
Yeah,
I have,
go ahead.
Bruce, you can go first.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying, like, I just have one point to add. I think at the current situation, because a lot of time you work on your own, I guess, to use your time wisely probably is important too, because I guess nothing can be perfect. If you pursue the perfection at a certain stage, then you end up didn't finish your project or has no end product. I guess it's going to hurt your confidence and everybody's confidence. So I think have the one product not perfect is better than have nothing like going to be perfect at the end.
Yeah, kind of building on the things that both Enoch and Bruce were saying. It was just like scope small, because like you might think a year is a long time because our co-ops have always been 4 months, but like it goes by really fast. So don't bite off more than you can chew. Have stretch goals if you want, but start small, and make sure you have a good team that like is willing to call each other out when people aren't doing things. Like you need to all be accountable to each other. And if you can find a professor who really fosters that sense of teamwork, that's really good. Because what happened for us was halfway through, our industry contact got laid off from the company, and we got a new contact who was not the greatest, but we still had to work with her. We had to be professional with her. So it was just like having the team to go back and be like, oh, I can't believe this just happened, and like being able to still work through that and keep going, and have our professor fight for us when we needed data and when we needed opportunities, because of like we'd started our project already and we'd done so much work already, and to make sure that was able to keep on going was really important, to have somebody to have our backs there.
That's a good point, because it really goes to that collaboration piece, right? Or dealing with conflict within your teams. And transparency is key for me. It's difficult, right? Because these are the tough conversations to have. Like, I'm a person that shies away from that, but again, it goes back to have that plan and hold people accountable to what they signed up for. Okay, so we'll keep going. We're going to get into our third piece of feedback. So I'll share my screen again just to kind of show you guys a few thoughts I had, and then we're going to make it completely interactive.
Brenda?
Yes.
I noticed we have somebody new that I don't think introduced
thank you for highlighting that. Hold on, I'm going to go back to my screen here.
I think it's Joseph.
Joseph, yes.
Hi, I'm a junior EIT. I think I recognize Pat. I went to Waterloo as well. I've been a couple of years working full-time now. I'm not with PEO. I was curious about this event, and I also signed up for this just to hear what everyone's thoughts are. So hi, everyone, and sorry I'm late. I came halfway through.
That's so good, as long as you could join. Thank you. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
I don't see anything yet.
Oh.
Yep, not yet.
I love the technical difficulties.
Don't we all? We're engineers. We should know how everything works, right? Like everything, all technology.
Yeah. You have to press the share button.
There we go.
There. Yeah,
ooh, it works.
Okay, so we're going to go into our feedback portion of it, so a couple of thoughts here, and this is where for me a lot of this reflection started happening, right? So I went back to just find some materials in terms of, feedback and reflection. They can really have a high impact on student learning, but there's really 3 conditions that I think need to be there to make it kind of an environment where they do end up getting that value. And then equally for me as, an employee at work as well. So feedback has to be immediate, regular, and relevant. And by this, I mean, again, you could be working on a project or you're sharing a lab with someone who's never said anything to you. And then one day out of the blue, 5 months down the road, they have feedback with the project that you're working on. So it puts a guardrail on someone who's supposed to be receiving that feedback to be like, oh, the only time you want to talk to me is when you have something, or if it's even negative feedback, even worse, right? So for feedback to be relevant, and as you plan your projects, or even if at work you're given a new project, I think it's important to level set as well with whoever your sponsor is or your professor in terms of constantly ask for that feedback, so you keep that dialogue open, and then you're not only going to ask for help or to seek feedback when something's gone wrong. I think a lot of us gravitate towards like, I'm going to, just stay undercover, and I'll only reach out to someone when things are going off track. So I think set up those consistent check-ins in terms of meetings with your sponsors, whether it's a quick update or sometimes just to share wins. I love to share wins of something you didn't even think was going to give an impact, right? So the second piece is learners, if you are receiving that feedback, right, you have to, or someone is giving you feedback, they have to do it in a planned time so that they give you the feedback. They give you time to reflect on it, and then you can also act upon that feedback. So it's really more of a cycle where when someone sits you down to give you feedback, as an example, right, you absolutely own an action to say, I hear you. Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to take it back so I can think upon it, and let's reconnect in a day or a week and set up another connection. And this allows you to get time to really think about it, reflect on how you're going to utilize that feedback or reject it if that's the case. A lot of the times I've even found myself in situations where I've had supervisors or someone reach out to me. They give me feedback. They don't give me time to think about it. And then it's like they're waiting there and it's awkward because they want an answer right away. So I think this was important to say, you as someone receiving feedback, or if you are giving feedback, always allow for time for someone to always go back and reflect, because reflection is what enables you to actually piece the dots and connections to be able to action it. And then the third piece is feedback is provided as a guide for learning. So this for me is really important for you guys to take away as well, because a lot of the times we associate feedback with it's just an assessment. I'm going to get a grade out of this, or it's a progression grade. So I think Andrew as well, it's like, meetings with your professor, don't just meet with them at the beginning and at the end or for that midterm grade, right? It's force that dialogue to make sure that, you're getting feedback or guidance. We want to turn this into more of a positive experience versus just, I'm here to look at what you're doing. And if I'm not happy, I'm going to say it. And then a lot of the times too, people giving feedback, they tend to only give feedback when it's negative, right? We never pause to give someone positive feedback. So again, the reflection for me here is that, feedback should be a free flow of communication. It's really checking up on updating. How can I support you if you're in the authoritarian state, right? It's really, how do we continue that collaboration so that we enhance and really kind of evaluate the work that teams are working on? So before we get into a discussion, because I'd love to kind of get thoughts and experiences from everyone on the call, I did find a TED Talk, and it's from a lady called Sheila Hin. And basically, the TED Talk is really about if you want to improve learning in your organization or even for yourself, the smart thing to do is really figuring out how to receive feedback. Even if it's off base and someone tells you something that's really not needed, and if it's poorly delivered, how do you use it to fuel growth? And I actually had an interesting incident at work this week where someone sent not so nice feedback, and it took me aback because at the end of the day, it turned out that there was really nothing wrong that I had done, right? So when I was reading about how do you turn feedback into fueling growth for yourself, I actually had the person, they send me the email, I send them back and I said, thank you for the feedback. Here's how I think we can fix it and collaborate together. And I set up meetings in their calendar, just, so we clear the air. And then it turns out that they actually came back to me and almost embarrassed because of how they had delivered what they were asking for and how I presented a more rational solution in terms of enhancing collaboration between some of the team members, right? So it's really important to that reflection piece of you've given feedback or you've received feedback, that reflection piece is really going to be the key for you, right? On how do I utilize that information? So I'll just do a quick stop share while I change my screen here. So, and it's literally like a 5-minute video. You guys can go in and
Yeah, Brenda also made a comment that feedback is super important because the project itself could have changed from the beginning, right? So you always have to keep a pulse on the goal itself and between the overall project and your own personal task, because in a dynamic world, you have to stay in lockstep.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I also like that you pointed out specifically that feedback takes time to think about and incorporate and to process and receive, because I think so often people expect they give you feedback and you're going to change like right away, like everything you've ever done the way you've done it.
Yeah.
And that's not always as easy as people think it is.
And I've had to work through that, right? Like it's not something that's so easy to do. It's now I'm owning saying I need time to think about this because I can't think off the fly under pressure. Okay. And let me know if you guys can hear this okay.
I was at the Harvard Negotiation Project and I wrote a book called Difficult Conversations. And I spent the last couple of decades traveling around the world helping people and organizations with some of their most challenging conversations. Now, the first thing that we do when we work with any group is that we say, well, what are your toughest conversations? What would you like some help with? And together we make a list that we can draw from throughout the day. Now, over the years, we started to notice a pattern, which is that feedback showed up on that list a lot. To put a finer point on it, feedback was on that list 100% of the time. It didn't matter what continent we were on. It didn't matter what industry we were in. It didn't even matter why they brought us in. People and organizations all over the world struggle with feedback. Now, for the first 10 years, we did what I think everybody does, which is that we taught givers how to give, more skillfully, more clearly, more often. How many of you have ever been to a session on how to give feedback? Did it help? Okay, please say yes, because I do some of that work. But your reaction echoes my own experience, which was, it helps. I mean, there's a lot you can learn, but it wasn't solving the problem. And then one day it occurred to us, you know what? In any exchange of feedback between giver and receiver, it's the receiver who's in charge. I mean, it's the receiver who decides what they're going to let in, what sense they're going to make of it, and whether and how they choose to change. I mean, maybe we've been going about this totally backwards. Maybe the key is learning how to take in the blizzard of feedback that we come in contact with every day. Because, by the way, I'm not just talking about performance reviews and other kinds of judgment and evaluation, grades, finding out how you measure up or stack up, you know, your marriage proposal, accepted, rejected. I mean, that's those kind of judgments are the most emotional kind of feedback. But I'm also just talking about everybody's suggestions for you, the little helpful parenting tips from your in-laws, right? And I'm also talking about the look in my third grader's eyes when she spots me in the audience, and those little nitpicky criticisms from my husband, which I think of less as feedback and more as just John being annoying, right? I mean, feedback is really our relationship with the world, and it's the world's relationship with us. I mean,
Brenda,
what
could you
if
mute your mic?
we could actually see receiving feedback as a skill? And we could get better at learning from feedback, taking charge of it and driving our own learning. So we don't have to wait around for good givers to show up. Because I don't know about you, I have some good givers, wonderful mentors, but mostly my life is populated by everybody else, right? People who are terrible at doing it, don't have time for it, who are difficult themselves. What if we could draw learning out of even off-base, unfair, poorly delivered feedback? What would happen? Now, what's interesting is that we looked around and said, okay, what's out there about why it's so hard to receive feedback and what to do about it? And really, there wasn't much. But what there was some research suggesting that if we could get better at this, it would make a huge difference. There were big rewards. What the research shows is that people who go out and solicit negative feedback, and by that what they mean is they're not just fishing for compliments. They're looking for what they can improve. Those people report higher work satisfaction, they adapt more quickly in new roles, and they get higher performance reviews, which suggests that if you get better at handling everybody's feedback for you, it doesn't just change you. It changes how other people see you and experience you. Now let me ask you this. I want to invite you to think about a piece of coaching or suggestion or advice that you've received in your life that you've rejected. You didn't take it. I want to ask you, why didn't you take it? Just think about that for a moment. I mean, maybe it was just wrong. It was bad advice. Maybe you didn't trust the person giving it to you. Maybe you were actually...
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and pause there, and I can send this link to everyone if you want to, like, the rest of the TED Talk gets into just how you handle the various situations, but I wanted to open it up for any thoughts or feedback.
I think it's very interesting how she said, like, a lot of people don't take the time to give good feedback. And I think that's also interesting that you do need to have some introspection before you can give somebody else feedback too. Otherwise, if you just blurt out the first thing you think, might not be the best way to deliver it, like that person who had emailed you, right?
Yeah.
And I think people, it's like prepping for meetings too. It's like people don't necessarily think of the time it involves to do it well.
Yeah, good point. If I could share, I would think feedback is almost an art, because you can't sometimes just say what's on your mind, because it could be hurtful or it could be just totally wrong. I've learned over the years that I never send a critical email on the spot. I always sleep over it, then I review it, then send it out, because the implications could be drastic. So I think feedback is good, but you also got to be careful how you provide it.
I'd like to add, I think feedback, as Norbert said, is really an art. And at the same time, you, in a virtual world and having a little bit now less interaction, it's getting a little bit difficult. So we have to adjust and be agile in how we give and take that feedback. Constructive feedback is what everybody should aim for, to give that sort of, you start off with what's working, what needs improvement, and sort of how to get there. It's almost like a coaching and mentoring style. So if you do that and you expect that from your supervisors for your capstone, or from your employers in the future, that's key. If you solicit feedback, though, be prepared that you will get that, and it may not be 100% what you're thinking, but it does put a pulse on how you're doing. So take it with a grain of salt. Always look at that constant improvement.
I like that analogy, Sam, because as I was thinking about this, I said, is you don't always have to take feedback with a sponge where it soaks everything in, right? You almost got to do your little mesh filter in the middle somewhere. And again, at the end of the day, you have to also think about, it's really important to, where do you want to go as well, right? So if it's a project you're working on, it's really important of what am I trying to achieve? Because again, and then utilize and channel that feedback to still give you that goal.
I do want to add, my daughter is in grade 4, and this is now being entrenched at that age. She received her report card. She received feedback from her teacher, and she was given the opportunity to actually give feedback to the teacher. And she took some serious time and effort to put that together. So it's very important that also your employer in the future, if there is a little bit of that openness to give feedback, because it is really a two-way street. Something that we may have a blind spot, maybe as the manager or supervisor. So it's very important to have that openness, but yet always respectful.
That's something that I was wondering about as my current experience has meant a co-op student. So I'm either on par with other students in my workplace, or I'm most likely working underneath people. I haven't seen much tips and things like that on how to give feedback to people who are kind of above you, if there are blind spots on things. That's something that I'd love to learn more about. Anyone has any tips and constructive ways to do that, instead of just saying, please don't throw me under the bus kind of thing?
No, for sure. I mean, from what I've learned over the first year and almost 2 years of working full time, I would say you have to develop that relationship with them so you can become comfortable. There needs to be that psychological safety in order to feel comfortable enough to say things that are not necessarily just good things. And to focus on how it's impacting you, instead of saying I don't like it when you are doing that, don't use that language. Instead, reframe it. So it's when I experience this is how it affects what I'm doing, the way I'm doing things, my day-to-day work life here. And that framing shift will change the way people receive that feedback.
That is a really good point, because I think at the end that it really is about framing. So you can come up with a negative feedback, and unfortunately it can actually have worse repercussions, because the person would feel that, I'm no good, I'm not going to be able to get better, I don't know how. But if you frame it in a way, that you kind of advise that, you may be so focused on the task at hand, but this is what else can be done to be able to make it even that much more better. I think that's the key. And I'm telling you, for directors, for managers, for everyone, from that point, we do what's called 360 evaluations. They're done every 2 years, I think. And it's just to kind of gauge where our blind spots are. So that's kind of key in a public organization. So that's something to kind of make sure that you're continuing. So I think at the end of the day, it really is about communication, just having open communication, being able to tell your thoughts, always be professional, and always be able, like, don't take offense, because the body language shows it. So just take it, make sure you have follow-up meetings. Don't take, just to kind of take it in, absorb it, and then have that opportunity to say, well, here's what I'm going to try to do about it if you find that it's true.
That's a great impact too. And part of it is overcoming just the fear of, the hierarchy as well, and I think that's the starting point, right? So make it intentional. Always put it in the calendar a few days before. You can't just walk in, right? So this is where we say if feedback has to be, you need to plan it out a little bit. So I think, setting up the meeting and letting your intention known is really key there. And then part of how we talk about it's how you actually deliver it, right? So in your case, where I've taken, and I'll let you Google this, you can Google stuff on situational leadership, right? And the whole aspect of that is to also think about the person that you're dealing with in terms of what is the level that they at. So I just recently started a new job during COVID in April, right? And I don't have that physical interaction with anyone. So it's really also assessing just how I'm asking in terms of I'm excited about the job. I have high commitment at that time, right? So, but I don't have the tools of really understanding the business at the beginning and, who do I talk to? So it's really detailed, make it planful, detail what it is that you want to provide the feedback, but also make it known why it's important to you and what you're trying to get. Because if someone doesn't make the connection of why you're telling me this, right, then they may perceive it differently. So you want to make sure that your question actually, I have feedback of, maybe you could, set up one-on-ones with me more frequently because it's valuable for me to get direction from you, considering that, I'm still learning. I'm new in my experiences, as an example.
Yeah, Andrew, another idea I can provide is in every situation, you always will find who you can trust and who you can get to know in any situation. And those could be your guide, your sponsor in any project. And if you have some ideas or feedbacks, you may want to bounce off those feedbacks initially with those people that you see as trustworthy, just to bounce it off, so that instead of just blasting your thoughts to the broader team, you may just want to check it, right? Feel a pulse, get a pulse to see if you're on the right track. It could be you could be totally on the right track, but you may want to just tip your toe in the water first and go all out before you go all out.
That's a great point. I'm smiling, Nubet, because I've had those scenarios where now, like, my husband's my bouncer offer because sometimes I'm loud when I'm passionate about something. It's difficult for me to hide it, right? So I practice find someone who you live with right now and just be like, okay, how's the delivery? Because they may see a body language or something that you yourself cannot see, right? So it's like practice with the mirror, but just have someone evaluate it for you.
Yeah. Because sometimes we're too focused, right? We become blindsided or into the broader direction. And I myself have those, I think we all humans have those tendencies that we get too focused in certain aspect. We shut off the other areas. And it's good to have a third party to validate what one thinks is still valid.
Do we have like structured questions that are going to be asked, or can I ask a question?
No, this is our interaction.
Oh, okay.
Perspective.
Perfect.
So anything else that you guys want to talk about, let's do it.
Okay, so I have a question that's more directed to maybe Jorgen and Bruce, because you both mentioned having done like consulting or client-based work. So I'm wondering how you give feedback in that situation where they're like your livelihood or your contract maybe depend on having a good relationship with them. And it's harder to give feedback because there's maybe a little bit less security there in that kind of relationship. Or anybody else who's worked in that kind of dynamic.
I guess I can start. Previously I gave financial advice to my clients, and that was one-on-one. And I would ask them personally to give me feedback, right, on my services. That way it wasn't threatening to them or to me, right? It was conversational style interaction, and I would listen to their advice and either improve what I'm doing, right? And that's the whole purpose, is to improve my service so I can offer something better to clients. So I don't think even in the workplace, I would ask my supervisor not directly, but indirectly, when I'm submitting something for review or for an assignment that I've been given, I would ask them, is this okay? How could I improve this for the next time? Is there anything else you'd like to see about this, right? I think you have to take the initiative to ask for the feedback. That demonstrates to the employer or to whoever you're providing service for that you care about your work and you care about how you're delivering it. And I think that's an important thing to show your passion for what you're doing.
In our case, now I've been working on both sides. In the past, I worked for consulting. Now I work on the owner side. So in our industry, public sector, in City of Toronto specifically, with my current employer, because on consulting work, we actually does have formal feedback process. There's a bunch of forms we have to fill out to provide for consultant at every I think at 2 stages, or if it at least one for design, one for construction services. And but days when I was working on the consultant side, I think one of the things I do, I just ask directly to the client, because if I work with them, I just ask them about how my work is done and how do they like my work, and you can feel and sometimes listen to the complaints, right? Because I do control systems, so a lot of my system was used by the operators and the engineers in the facility, and they would give me some feedback. I think this interface should be changed, or that looks if I change to that can look better. So sometimes I just listen to it. Not necessarily I will change it, because there's cost to the company. So if I spend my hours there, but I do listen. And another way to get feedback is if you feel something can be improved, or you're not, or on the other hand, should I say, if you're not happy with your own work, you can even ask them, say, if I do this, would you like it, right? So that kind of confirm whether your view is right and your work, are they really happy with your work or not? Sometimes, yeah, I think they're afraid to, they probably won't be that straightforward with what they do. And some of them they do. And when clients are not happy, you will hear from them for sure.
That's an interesting point. Many years ago, I attended a seminar with the founders for WestJet flights. And one of their topics, one of their founding members said that with WestJet, the reason why they were able to get successful was they don't focus on their 5% of negative comments that they get. They focus on their 95% of good service and they work on enhancing, they focus on the positives, you know, in terms of enhancing those experiences, because that's the majority of the number, right? So I think, you know, a lot of the people here on the call today kind of mentioned, make sure you're also getting feedback from various places. It's also important because, you know, you may, if you're going to one person, especially if you're early in your career, they can make or break you by saying the wrong thing, right? So, you know, figure out yourselves in terms of these are my goals. I've been in that situation where I was working at a company, and it's important to also have, because it was always conflict, and I used feedback as my avenue to really kind of gauge what was going on. I did a full 360 of my peers, which came back really well, and then my own VP in that direction was a different set. So that really kind of took me back to say, everyone else that I work with are fine with what I'm doing and they think it's valuable, except for the one person that I do report to, right? So from that, I had to step back and also evaluate that sometimes it's not a perfect fit for what you're doing, but it's how you manage knowing that information, right? So I think Sam and Noah kind of talked about how it's really how you take that feedback, you ask for it, be ready for the knowledge that will come, and how you action that in terms of just your approach with the everyday as well. Any other comments, questions?
I will take full advantage and ask as many questions as I can fit in the
do.
session. I'm just saying. My next one is targeted towards everybody, especially people who haven't gotten to speak much yet, is if you ever like can't or will struggle to incorporate feedback, how do you approach that? Do you ever tell people like, no, I can't do that, or you just don't tell them and hope they don't come back to you with the same feedback again? Or what is your approach when, yeah, you either cannot or it will be very difficult to incorporate feedback?
Any volunteers? It's a tough question. It's a good one.
So if I heard you, sorry, go ahead.
You go first, Never.
Okay, all right. So if I heard you say, ask your question correctly, you wanted to know how to incorporate feedback, right? Is that the gist of your question, Pat?
More like how to approach people when you cannot, or you're finding difficulty with incorporating feedback that they've given you.
Okay, when I look back at my situation, I would generally acknowledge feedbacks without pinpointing anyone, because you don't want to put anybody under the bus or just pinpoint. Just generally acknowledge that feedbacks was provided to me, and then I have thought about the feedbacks that I received, and here's my blah blah blah, right? If that person still feels strongly about me not covering their questions or feedbacks, they may reach out to me or extend the olive branch to say, look, reach out to me if you have specific areas that I have not addressed. I think that's my style. I try not to be confrontational because I don't know who my target is at that point. And maybe they just forgot some of the things they said. But I usually try to acknowledge that I solicited feedbacks, and this is my take of those feedbacks. That's just my style.
I think another way I can see to look at the situation, or like say basically say not to incorporate what people want, right? Because really when I'm dealing with clients, they always come up with ideas. Everybody have different opinion. First, I guess you have to hear everybody, just not one person, like Brandon said. You have to hear like what other people say, right? Not just this one person or just one side. On the other hand, maybe you can you have to show what's the impact. Like if you say agree with him, show him what's going to impact the whole thing. And maybe there are some other things the person has not thought about. And also there's to solve the problem he pointed out, or the way the one or expectation he proposed, then maybe there's other alternative instead of doing what he wants. Basically, it's a conflict resolution skills. You just have to. It's more art, I think, and that's why if it's on a project, and I have seen a lot of consultant or contractor use that to us as an owner. What they do is they say, okay, no problem, man, that's a good idea. I will do that. They record it in the meeting, or record it as but I look at my contract, that's not in my contract. So yeah, I will do it, but it's going to cost you $1 million. And now they decided, okay, forget it. I'm not going to do it. Yeah, something happened in my work.
Actually, Bruce, this is really good, because the feedback here, you have to kind of look at it, Pat, to your question. Can you actually incorporate that feedback? So for instance, if it's going to have a cost element, your duty is to say, if you're the consultant and you're talking to the client, to say, yes, this is something we considered. However, the cost was not there. We've done this value engineering sort of exercise. We've done a little bit of the detailed cost estimates. And this is why, for the health of the project, the funding that you have, this is truly what we can do. So you have to look at the type of feedback and separate it according to what exactly it means to you. If it's a personal feedback on how you perform, that's different. Those are the ones you have to be very, very delicate with, especially, as Norbert said, almost have a mentor that you run by, because you're going to be angry sometimes. You have to control yourself, take that sort of feedback and bring it to a very objective way of discussion. But as Bruce said, and I was manager of design and construction in Oakville, yes, we've had consultants where it's the omissions that are happening is what is soliciting or what I'm giving some serious feedback on, because to me, those omissions mean that we didn't get what we paid for. However, when you do have that discussion, you might find a little bit of maybe more dialogue that you didn't consider. So it's not meeting the design criteria, it's not meeting sort of standards. Maybe there was something else that the consultant did, as you're basically hiring them for their knowledge and skills, so to be able to come up with a solution on your behalf. But this is where you need to be as best as you can, have strength in what they do, so you can actually be able to challenge sometimes those decisions and those designs.
I'm going to add a bit to it as well. I think you have to be selective of who you ask feedback from. You can't just say, ask it of everybody and try and incorporate everything that everybody says. You have to be selective, and you have to take some trust in the people that you're asking, that they have your best interests at heart too, right? When it comes to personal things, soft skills or whatever else. In terms of hard skills, well, that's something else. I mean, that's something that you have to deal with in terms of knowledge and everything else, and that you should take seriously. Soft skills, yes, you should take seriously, but look where it's coming from.
Great dialogue. Any other questions?
Oh, I guess I have a general question though. Is everyone here okay if I reach out on LinkedIn and add you?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Pat, the worst answer is no, but most likely any
Exactly.
situation is that you probably, let's say we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. If you reach out to 10 people, chances are you get at least, 3 or 4. So you're already ahead. So I always say to people, my own kids, the worst answer is no. Chances are you go between 0 and 10 people, so you're still ahead. So go for it.
Sounds good.
Okay, this has been fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate everyone's engagement, and hopefully you guys get to join more of these sessions. I think there's a very detailed agenda for them this month, lots of events on the go. If you have time, please do register. What I do have to do from an admin perspective, so Sarah can be happy with us as host for today, is I'm going to launch a poll of just 3 questions. If you guys could just detail and go through that. And again, this is feedback for NEM Ontario for next year when they kind of go into their planning sessions as well. So if you guys could click on there.
To be honest, I was like a little bit worried that because we had a small group, we wouldn't have a lot of things happen. But I think it's nice that everybody almost pretty much gets a chance to speak this way when it's a smaller group.
It's really worked out well. And like I said, like with the interaction from everybody, I have my own takeaways that I'm certainly going to reflect on this week. So thank you, everyone.
And Brenda, I really enjoyed this, and I really learned a lot, especially the presentation part. I think I need to kind of hone my skills there. So thank you.
You're welcome, guys. Well, we're going to be working together, Sam. So lots on the agenda. And Andrew and Pat, we wish you all the very best. And to everyone else who's joined, who's now part of the Oakville chapter, thank you for the engagement. And please reach out anytime. Would love to hear more about your journey as well as you progress. Okay, have a great Saturday.
Yeah,
Go
sorry,
ahead, Norbert.
just to echo on that, since Pat already made a preamble saying that she will reach out on LinkedIn, by all means, reach out. I actually provided some feedback, career advice to a chapter member who reached out to me on LinkedIn. He was debating between, he had 2 job offers. He wasn't sure which one to go for. I obviously didn't know all the details, but I gave him some guided advice, and he was very thankful, and at least he felt better, because I think he was struggling. He just reached out to me, on LinkedIn as a chapter member. So I would say networking and just reach out, it will be very productive, no matter how you look at it.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you everyone so much. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Brent.
Bye,
Thanks for
everyone.
hosting the event. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.